The concentration of wealth and power within giants like Facebook, Google, and Amazon are turning the companies into influential political entities.
We spoke with anti-corruption scholar and activist Zephyr Teachout, who argues in her new book, Break 'em Up, Recovering Our Freedom from Big Ag, Big Tech, and Big Money, that in order to build a better future, we must eradicate monopolies from the private sector while preventing new ones from forming. The book aims to be a blueprint for grassroots organizations to address these issues at a community level, and the foreword is written by one Senator Bernie Sanders. Joining us now to talk about the book is attorney, political activist, and author of Break 'em Up herself, Zephyr Teachout. Great to see you.
Oh, it's great to be on. Thank you so much.
We're so glad to have you. Congratulations on the book. I think it's an incredibly important read. Just start with the basics of why this issue is so important and how it pervades every aspect of our lives.
We have a society right now that has such a high level of corporate concentration that it affects everything we do. In fact, what I argue in the book is it's a kind of government that's coexisting with formal democratic government. In the last decade, we've allowed 500,000 mergers worldwide. Just think about that. And while we're so laser focused on what's happening in what we call the political sphere, you see companies like DuPont and Dow merging, Bayer and Monsanto merging. Google one year bought a company a week. And these Goliaths, basically, they're not participants in the market. They control the market. When you look at something like Facebook, they basically decide what news organizations survive, thrive, and fail. When you look at something like Amazon, they squeeze small businesses and decide who fails or who succeeds. So it's a feudal system. It's not a open market. And the effect is incredible inequality, an incredibly high degree of powerlessness. And we just haven't done anything about it for over 40 years.
Zephyr, you used a very specific and important point there. You said that this is a private government. Now, explain what you mean by that and about the power that is wielded over average American citizens' life. Why is it analogous to a government?
When we think of a government, we think of something that basically makes regulations, right? And that's one of the functions of government, that is not part of, ruled by others, but in fact does the ruling. So just think about, say, privacy policy. Who's doing privacy policy in America right now? Facebook, Google. Yeah. And we all act like that. We even accept it. It's like when Mark Zuckerberg makes an announcement about a change, we're like, oh, the privacy czar has spoken. And our petitions tend to be towards Zuckerberg, like, please change your policy, or Google, please change your policy, really treating them as if we are petitioning our government. And when it comes to something like Amazon, and I'm focusing on big tech today, although it's by no means only big tech, but because of the upcoming hearing. When it comes to something like Amazon, if you are a seller on Amazon, there is a public intellectual property regime, but the intellectual property regime that matters is Amazon's judiciary. Do you get kicked off because they treat you like a fake when you're not? Or do you get to stay on and be a fake even though people are telling Amazon that there's a problem? The Amazon judicial system, and Josh Ziza has done some great reporting on this, basically becomes the judicial system for Amazon sellers. So they're taking over all of these different functions of government, regulating, decision making, and basically we treat these companies increasingly like, okay, we want to change minimum wage, we'll go to the companies instead of going to government. And that's upside down because they're wholly unaccountable. There's a whole debate in political theory about different forms of government. But private monopolistic government has no legitimacy. Like, it doesn't even have the claim of monarchy to some claim of legitimacy. These are just private actors. Jeff Bezos, would you choose him to govern us? No.
Right. And certainly no one has, but effectively that's exactly what's happening. How did we get to this place? How did the legal regime structure that we have so utterly fail to deal with these problems?
Yeah. Well, there was a body blow in 1980 when Ronald Reagan came along, and a central part of the Reagan agenda was not just gutting regulation, but gutting antitrust in particular. And he and his administration totally rewrote the the FTC guidelines for when to allow mergers, totally changed what anti-monopoly policy was by focusing on regulators pulling back from enforcement, appointed tons of judges who had a pretty radical, strange view of anti-monopoly and antitrust, which is it's just about consumer prices. But then what you might think is, okay, Reagan came along, and then when a Democrat got in office, they would perhaps return to the long American history of busting up big companies. But no, in fact, it has been a bipartisan elite consensus that mergers are generally good for consumers, that big is better, and that the only time that we should possibly ask questions about these Goliaths is if there's really direct evidence that a merger might lead to lower consumer prices. We're sort of been banned for 40 years from talking about political power, worker power, effect on small businesses. The modern contemporary ideology explicitly says you don't really need a lot of competitors to have competition. You just need the theory of possible competition, and then you have competition.
And I think the most important thing to lay out here is that it's not just tech, although that is where that is where a lot of the discussion is here. Even in the name of your book, you talk about ag, you talk about so many other sectors. Could you just lay out the real life examples? What does this do to the American worker and to the American consumer?
Yeah. I spend a lot of time on ag, both because it's such a tragedy, also because I come from a rural area, but also I think it's because people can really connect to that. So I think we're basically, throughout the book, I argue that we're basically all increasingly like chicken farmers in relationship to various Tysons or Purdue's or Pilgrims. So in the chicken industry, there's a handful of big distributors. And if you're a chicken farmer, in order for your chicken to get to the supermarket, you need to go through this choke point. You're not driving the chicken yourself. So what does, let's say, Tyson's, what is the relationship between a farmer and Tyson's? Well, the farmer looks like she's independent. She took out her own mortgage, built her own chicken house. But in practice, Tyson's will say, we're not going to sell your chickens unless you use our feed, unless you use our advisors, unless you use our lighting systems, unless you use our chicken eggs. But it's not just that. It's we don't want you to talk to other farmers. In fact, you're going to sign a contract that says you won't talk to farmers about any of your processes, including how much you get paid. We may be paying you differently than other farmers, and we're going to pay you differently every month, depending on how much how much in chicken meat you bring in. So these farmers are basically in this position of rational paranoia. They're more like subjects in an experiment than autonomous business owners. And Crystal, you're a business owner. You know how important it is to be able to make those difficult decisions. These farmers have no power. They can't even talk to their competitors or neighbors. And when they speak up politically, they believe, and there's really good reporting on this, that they get punished. So
right.
If Tyson stops taking your chickens to market, well, you are actually, you're going to go bankrupt, you're going to be in debt, and you're going to go out of business. So they're entirely dependent on these choke points. Yeah. Now, what I argue is that's the same as what Amazon sellers' relationship to Amazon is. Right.
And so, Zephyr, as we're looking forward to potential Joe Biden administration, not the thing that either you or I were really hoping for, but here we are. Yep. What is it that we should be pushing that administration to do and pursue? And if we have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House, what should we be advocating for?
Oh, the presidency is so important here. And there's a huge question mark around Biden's anti-monopoly policy. We just haven't seen a lot of talk about it. And there's, I think, a huge opportunity. And by the way, this is an area where people come together from all different backgrounds. There's growing anger at these corporate monopolies. So I really hope he seizes this moment. We should be looking for who he appoints in key positions at the Department of Justice and the FTC, insistence on rewriting the antitrust guidelines so that we don't basically continue to allow these mega mergers and instead focus on real investigation into anti-competitive behavior. But if we're talking about Congress and the Senate, there's a lot they can also do. I think we need to do like several different steps. One is have Congress act to overturn all these terrible Supreme Court cases from the 80s on. In other areas, when the Supreme Court gets something wrong, like, say, Lilly Ledbetter, Congress says, okay, we're going to fix that. In fact, President Obama's first bill signing was overturning a bad Supreme Court decision. Congress can act right now to start overturning those bad laws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So interesting, Zephyr. Thank you so much. Really looking forward to the book, and I really encourage all of our viewers to go out and buy it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zephyr.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. Tomorrow on Rising, we're joined by host of The Pushback on the Gray Zone and contributor at The Nation, Aaron Mate. We're also going to look at our conversation with economist Thomas Piketty about wealth and income inequality in the United States. Enjoy.